My name is Jeff Mucci. I'm with RCR Wireless News, and today we have a webinar focusing on LTE monetization strategies for carriers. Our guest today is Michael Blauer, who is Director of Product Management for BroadSoft. Before we get started and turn it over to Michael, I'd like to just run a quick poll for the audience just to get a feel for the audience views on the biggest benefits of the availability of LTE. So what you'll see on your screen now is a poll, and we'll leave this open for about 30 to 45 seconds. And we'd ask everyone to please cast your vote. And Michael, I'll wait till we have about 70% of the attendees vote. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in just another 10 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to share the results at this point. Michael, you can see those on your screen. At the Q&A, we'll come back and talk a little bit about the audience responses and maybe compare and contrast those to what you've seen in your test. But today's speaker is Michael Blauer, who is Director of Product for BroadSoft. Michael, thanks for joining us. I'll turn over the presentation to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who joined. It's a pleasure to share with you some thoughts and hopefully some discussion at the end of the presentation. As much as we can, I'd like to make it interactive. So let me start by saying that this is a fairly large area to tackle. And before I do that, let me provide just a brief overview about BroadSoft for those of you who may not be as familiar with us as others. So we would like to think that we have industry leadership in the voice over IP and application layer for mobile and fixed operators, with about 30% revenue market share. We are deployed in 18 of the 25 top carriers in the world based on revenue. And we're proud to have 65 IMS deployments with pretty much every IMS core provider out there. And in total, we have about 500 customers in 73 countries. Our focus is solely on the application layers for service providers. We do not sell directly to enterprise. And in terms of focus on R&D, you might see a chart on the right that shows R&D as percentage of sales, and we are proud to be a leader in that area as well. In terms of people, we have well over 600 people now in 22 countries. And our R&D team is comprised itself from about 250 folks. And we're also an active player in the ecosystem as a whole. We have 450 technology partners and another 5,000 development partners that we address through a fairly unique, we'd like to think, program that we call Extended that allows developers to work with us very closely. So with that out of the way, let me perhaps indicate the general areas that I'd like to touch on. So obviously, I'll start with some market and technology snapshot just to place us where we are in terms of both LTE adoption, but also some other trends in the market. Then talk a little bit about consumer revenue acceleration strategies. Move from there to the enterprise space, which we consider to be extremely important and has certainly its own drivers and opportunities. And then end with a summary and a question and answer period. So let me kick this off by something which is very topical these days, and this is the over-the-top threat. And I'd like to make a point that is perhaps not as traditional to say that the major threat is from the way that over-the-tops actually are setting user expectations as opposed to any direct impact on revenue that's already being felt. Such revenue is indeed being felt in certain areas, but it's not nearly as dramatic as a lot of people would let us believe. However, what the over-the-top are doing is they are creating an expectation out there for high-definition voice, for video, for IM and text, all integrated into multiple devices. They are showing how mobile and broadband and Wi-Fi can be integrated in terms of access. It shows how history in terms of either your own personal contacts or chat history or call history can be accessed across different devices. They show the value of an integrated address book. You have presence, you have social media integration, you have multi-party video, you have screen share, and we have capability discovery that allows you to see at any time, who is communicating with you and what kind of media you could use in that communication. And on the right, I'm showing some of the key players there, obviously with Skype being a very important one, but also you have specialist players such as Uhu in the video space, and even the operators have started delivering some of these services in order to make sure that they can hold the market when it comes to these capabilities. So with these expectations being set, it is really a stark contrast if we look at what MNOs can natively support today. And I've just shown some examples of pain points here that perhaps many of you have experienced. And it's fairly common for people to type a number from their mobile address book into a fixed phone if they don't want to use their mobile at any given time. When you're roaming, a lot of people try to use applications such as Skype over Wi-Fi, which is something that they cannot do with a mobile operator service. Group chat is not possible. Person-to-person video. I mean, there are hands that are enabled, but how many of us have actually used it? You don't know what's the capability other end. So I think the key roadblocks that are obvious from this list is that multi-device is important, access integration important, and obviously, and probably the most important one for mobile operators is interoperability. So just to make sure that we actually have some facts that confirm that users indeed want this, we have run a poll not so long ago with Cohen, and we've asked some questions. This was targeted more to the enterprise users, but the answers I think are pretty unequivocal. If you look at a lot of these components, the overwhelming proportion say that not only do they want it, but they expect the mobile operator to actually deliver these capabilities. So the demand is out there. While this is taking place on the revenue side, and as before, there are some factors that are creating some significant challenges at the moment. And even though they're not all that significant in some areas that are very highly publicized, they're nevertheless important. So one area is messaging revenues, and we're seeing erosion there. And we have to keep in mind that 10 to 20% of mobile operator EBITDA comes from messaging, and while the impact is still small, that is an important slice of revenue that has to be protected. Roaming is another area that used to be a very lucrative, high-margin revenue generator. And I want to share with you the chart on the left-hand side, which I think is very indicative. It shows what would be the cost of an over-the-top minute if it were to be provided, let's say, by somebody like Skype using mobile operator roaming data. And until now, this was actually a barrier. It turned out that to use a minute of voice on Skype while roaming was actually more expensive than using a minute of voice while roaming. And that was because the data rates were really artificially high. There is an EU mandate that has just come out, which is actually shown there in the blue line, and it shows that the cost of a minute over VoIP is going to plunge dramatically. So we're seeing another area of high margin revenue that's going to come under a lot of pressure. And data ARPU has been actually compensating for some of this revenue impact. But as you can see in this chart at the right-hand side at the bottom, this is now facing some share of wallet limits. This is a graph that's very interesting that shows that telephone services as a share of wallet has actually grown significantly over the last few years. So therefore, there are some limits to how much that can be pursued further. What about cost? Obviously, monetization has to include both the revenues and the cost aspects, and here we see some really troubling trends. First of all, in terms of data traffic, you can see the exponential rise of data, and this obviously triggers some very, very high capital intensity in the industry, which is probably at a record high. And this is linked obviously to deploying the LTE itself, but also deploying IMS and some of the RCS application server upgrades. Acquisition costs have really spiraled due to device subsidies. And I picked one example here from Canada, which is where I happen to be based. And this is just one data point, but it shows that in 2011, the year-over-year CapEx expenditure has gone up by 27%. So obviously, those are significant impacts. And the question that to be asked is something that we heard recently at an RCS conference, where panelists asked, are we building tracks for somebody else's train? So that's obviously the risk when you're spending such significant amounts and are unsure about how to monetize it. So the end result of this, as you'd expect, if there's pressure on cost and pressure on revenue, is you get a margin squeeze. And I think this graph that comes from RCS Littles from this year is actually very, very telling. It shows you the margin and the way it's shrinking over time, both in North America and in Western Europe. And you can see that if this trend continues, there's going to be a crossover point that I indicated there with the red arrow, where we may reach a situation where the margin on incremental capacity, I want to be careful here to indicate incremental capacity, if you add a gigabyte of throughput, the incremental revenue that you might get through that is actually not going to leave you with much margin. So obviously, this is an area of concern. I know that a lot of folks are looking at graphs like this and asking how to address it. But there are some good news. So having looked at some of these challenges, the opportunity actually remains very large and very promising. So the first point that I would make here is the over-the-top players are actually educating the market and validating the market. So to some extent, they're actually preparing the way for mobile operators to follow through with services that are perhaps have broader reach than what these niche players can provide. And they tend to be fragmented. And in fact, when you think about it, the more of these players there are, the smaller are the community of interest that they actually hold. And therefore, they're less of a threat. And this may be perhaps a way to explain why some of the mobile operators have launched some of their own over-the-top services. And we see this as an attempt to just keep some of their user base and prevent some consolidation by some large player, such as potentially Skype or some other players. And while the over-the-top providers' costs are low, the monetization from their perspective is very hard. They need to charge separately for the services, and the services tend to be very niche, so therefore it's not making it easy for them to monetize your services. On the other hand, we have to remind ourselves that we have probably a 6 billion global interoperable community. This community shares a universal identity, which is the mobile phone number. We have the advantages, or the mobile operators have the advantage of pre-configuring handsets, of being able to ensure quality. They have the billing relationship already established with customers. They have the whole range of bundling opportunities that would make delivering these services and ensuring their uptake a lot more easy. But the main issue that we feel and a lot of people in the industry feel is the question of time. This window is not going to be open forever, and we need to move faster, and at the same time we need to find some better cost structures while we're doing it. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see what are the trends that are actually supporting this effort by mobile operators. So number one is LTE itself, and this is going to be the primary focus here. It is gaining traction, and we see that I'm actually not sure if this is still up to date, but at least 300 operators in various countries are investing in LTE. So LTE is happening. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how fast. At the same time, the overall network transformation is also progressing. We're seeing IMS being deployed. We're seeing VoLTE being prepared to launch, which will move voice onto the same IP infrastructure. And similarly, RCS, that I'm going to talk about a bit later on, is also moving messaging into the IP domain. So we're getting this convergence that will obviously enable new services. At the same time, device trends are also very favorable from that perspective. The smartphone and proliferation of mobile devices, tablets, various other mobile connected devices, enable operators to deliver through an app model a very rich and very consistent user experience across devices. It's something that they were not necessarily able to do, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago even. And this allows them also to create a branded mobile operator experience on those devices. So branding is now not just the luxury of some very large operator groups, but in fact every mobile operator can brand their user experience. And finally, on the cost side or the delivery side, we're seeing also some positive trends in terms of managed and cloud services, and those will improve cost, improve time to market. And that would help us with the other side of that equation, which is the cost side.
Hello, Michael. Sorry to interrupt, but could you speak up a little, please? We're having several folks that are having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I'll try. Is this better?
That is better.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me make a comment though before we go to the actual offers that we would like to discuss, is that sometimes the sort of obvious suspects are not necessarily the answer. VoLTE by itself is viewed by many as more of a cost reduction effort. If you consider the fact that you will be getting high definition voice and video, but that can actually be provided by other means, then the biggest driver is the efficiency and frequency reuse that is being enabled by VoLTE and the lower operational cost. The same is true to some extent about RCS, or rich communication services. It is late and it is very complex. And what is happening is that the first releases of RCS actually offer you a less rich experience than some of the over-the-top providers. So it is perceived by many as a defensive play. It's just a way of catching up. And this has to be sped up, and then the costs have to be managed. And finally, these elements, VoLTE or RCS, do not in themselves address the business UC opportunity, which I will obviously touch later, and then we feel that it is an enormous opportunity that needs to be tapped into. So with that introduction in terms of the dynamics of the marketplace, if you will, I will move on to talk about some specific consumer monetization strategies. And let me show first a kind of a high-level view of some drivers that we consider to be extremely important. The first one is the issue of a network effect. We know that this is the key in person-to-person communication, whether it's consumer or business. And with LTE rolling out, but still being patchy in terms of coverage, this is something that to the extent that we want to accelerate. And this can be done through extending the application experience, not only on LTE, but on Wi-Fi and broadband access, and to enable it on multiple devices, which I had mentioned before. So by doing this, you'll have more endpoints and more coverage that would enable a larger community to participate in these services. The second element is to stimulate usage. And we at BroadSoft feel that video is by far the most compelling element of these multimedia opportunities. It is compelling in business. It is also compelling and becoming increasingly more accepted by consumers. And it is the one service that will generate the most amount of data usage and will fully take advantage of LTE. However, it can actually be accomplished with fairly good quality still on some HSPA or HSPA plus networks, and we don't necessarily need to wait until full LTE coverage. And the third one is, again, user experience. And we can't emphasize this enough. We need to get to a point where you have multimedia device integration and user experience at least matches, it does not exceed some of these over-the-top offers. And at the bottom, I'm showing that the network is evolving in sync with these opportunities, and in fact, some of them can be done before you have full LTE coverage. The next slide is an illustration of some of the business drivers that underlie these approaches. And this is a very quick business case that we ran to see the effect of those three strategies and what do they do to a pro forma or a typical business case. So what you're seeing here, you're seeing some graphs that show the baseline business case. And then we layered on first the advancement that can be achieved by pushing video applications sooner. We also brought in the effect of the network that's created by enabling multi-device and downloadable clients and access over Wi-Fi. And what you see is essentially, even if the endpoint is similar, the improvement in terms of metrics such as NPV are very significant. And we've seen improvements that can range to 25 and 35% in terms of NPV. So these are very, very tangible strategies and can have very significant benefits to users. So with that said, let me drill down a little bit more into the multiple device opportunity and try and articulate what exactly the opportunity is, and then show some case studies that will sort of reinforce that method. So when we talk about a multi-device or often provided as a one-number service, we're talking about clients that are available on PCs or tablets that complement the mobile device. You have handsets now that supports video and IM&P, and typically native voice and SMS, so we're not talking about over-the-top voice. And you have a one number or one identity that ties together all these devices to the mobile number identity. And you can do some nice things such as, you get the usual SIM ring that we're all familiar with, but you can also pull the call from one device to another depending on the form factor that you want to use at any given time. And you have synchronization of some of those history elements that we know are very important user experience, such as call history, message history, voice DM, and so on. And the value proposition here is very clear. Mobile operators can establish a strategic presence on what I call SIM-less devices, meaning devices that don't actually have a SIM card in them. And it stimulates usage because, again, you have these additional endpoints, and it also obviously accelerates the time to revenue. So with that service description in mind, let me show a case study that perhaps many of you are familiar with, but Rogers in Canada has launched a service along these lines. You can see on the right-hand side their own description of the service. And they have provided presentations on this in many different forums that some of you may have been exposed to. The service provides essentially the capabilities that I've highlighted in the previous slide. I would add that there is live video as well, that they can actually chat within that user community that subscribes to Rogers One. And preliminary results are showing that this service is, increase ARPU and lower churn. Obviously, if your service now is deployed on multiple devices instead of one, the barrier to switching becomes a little bit higher. So this is one, I think, very important proof point for the value of the service. I'll show another case study. This one is a little bit older, but still very indicative in terms of the demographics, especially that it addresses. And this is Optimus, which is the third operator in Portugal. They've launched a fixed mobile integration service, which provides a web phone, which again is tied to the mobile service and provides you also with SMS and other messaging capabilities. And they've launched it with a very, very innovative business model. It was targeted towards teenagers, and they were given this service if they maintained a certain level of spend, which was actually relatively low, but it ensured that they would be more consistent users, which is not often the case with prepaid subscribers. And the value proposition here was to increase ARPU, but also they had an opportunity to bring in advertising and other revenue streams. And from the end user point of view, there was an element of cost control because they got unlimited messaging, which is obviously very important for this demographic. And again, here we have some information which is not that appropriate necessarily to share quantitatively, but there was significant increase both in the consistency of the spend and also in terms of the retention of this segment. Okay, so that was for the multi-device opportunity. I want to address briefly the access, the multi-access opportunity, if you will, Wi-Fi and broadband access. It may seem paradoxical because, we're talking about LTE, and this is another form of access. However, I think the same point about creating the community of interest and networking is very important. Some of this data, I think, is very revealing, and it shows that a lot of data on mobile devices is actually consumed over Wi-Fi. So on the left, you can see the distribution of data, whether it's over cellular or Wi-Fi, and you can see that in most countries, the majority of data is actually consumed while these devices are hooked to a Wi-Fi network. And on the right-hand side, you see that tablets that, as we all know, are taking off. But if you look and see how many of them actually have a SIM card and use 3G or 4G or whatever form of mobile data may be available, is still actually quite low. So those devices, if you want to leverage them, it is very important to enable the service to work seamlessly over Wi-Fi as well. So this is we believe, a very important contributor to the acceleration of the LTE service adoption. And a case study in this particular area, just to illustrate it. So some of you may be aware that T-Mobile in the U.S. has launched a Wi-Fi calling solution. It works over their IMS core. It provides also SMS. And it's called simply the T-Mobile Wi-Fi calling service. It actually provides quite deep integration into the actual handsets that are supporting the service. There is no voice call continuity, but we don't see too many indications that this has actually hindered the service. In terms of handsets, they were able to make this available into a number of leading handsets. And in fact, they have even made the client that is supporting this something that is open source, as they are trying to push this particular trend as well towards the rest of the industry. So here's a clear example of an operator for acceleration as well as coverage drivers launching the Wi-Fi calling solution. The next slide talks a little bit about video, and I had mentioned that at the beginning that if you look at from all the services for one element that first of all leverages the high speed of Wi-Fi as well as some of the higher speed range of the 3G networks, is compelling person-to-person service, and it is also a big consumer of mobile data. It's obviously video. And this is something that can be accelerated if handsets do not yet support native video. This can be complemented by clients, and the clients can be branded and share the same identity as the mobile operator's number. And services like this can be deployed, and I mentioned Rogers, for example, that has done this as well. So it is possible to launch a video service relatively quickly without necessarily, again, having to wait either for fully embedded capabilities in devices or for full coverage of LTE. So,
Michael, we're having a hard time hearing you again. Could you make sure you speak right into the microphone, please? Thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, let me take a pause here and adjust the equipment and kind of move to rich communication services. I think most of you would be familiar with this as one of the key initiatives in the area of consumer multimedia communications. So if you look at the RCS, especially the RCS 5 definition, which is the full-blown service as it is defined today, it actually meets, at least on paper, all the consumer UC elements that we would like to see. It specifies an enhanced address book, it specifies presence and capability discovery, it specifies IM integration, in-call, file and image share, also live video share. It mandates legacy interworking, so if the other side of this communication only has MMS or SMS, it would still work. It is meant to support multiple devices, including broadband devices that would access this capability. And again, the mobile identity is the one that anchors all these endpoints. So from that perspective, it seems to really answer all the drivers that we have seen so far. However, there are some issues with RCS, and those have to do with the actual complexity in deployment rather than the service definition, which is actually fairly complete. So just briefly to mention the status here, we've seen that RCSE or Join, which is a limited subset of the functionality, being launched mostly as a beta. Spain has just recently announced that all 3 operators have a beta version that is now interoperable. We know that Germany is launching as we speak. 2 of the operators, and probably the 3rd one will launch soon thereafter. And we expect additional launches in Germany, France, Italy quite soon. And there's also significant commitment that we've seen from handset providers to actually provide embedded handset support for RCS. In North America, the focus has been more on RCS5, and this is more associated with some of the VoLTE and general LTE advancement that is taking place there. And Metro PCS in particular has announced a partial RCS5 launch recently. And in Asia, things have been a little bit slower, and but we know that Korea, for example, would likely launch an RCS service next year. So this is just to show, this initiative and where it stands. Now, I mentioned some challenges. I think that it's important to look at them and try to understand them. First of all, RCS is an IMS service, so as such, it incurs the cost, complexity, and the time to market barriers that IMS brings with it. There's also the cost of the application server, and there's multiple of them that have to be deployed. And then the handset support, while it's going to be coming very shortly, we know that the adoption curve is something that takes a fair bit of time. And in order to accelerate this in the early stages of that adoption, we need to have downloadable clients that would support handset or smartphones that do not have this embedded yet. There's an issue with Apple participation, which may require a downloadable client there for a longer period of time. And finally, there are some, while there's a very strong strategic driver for RCS, some of the business case aspects are relatively soft, and those have to create a very strong push to actually contain cost and contain risk. So I'd like to show you one example of how to address these challenges, and this is what BroadSoft has done recently. We've announced the launch of an RCS service, and very briefly, it is an RCS-C and RCS5 compliant, which will happen sometime early next year. But the key element here is that, number one, it can be deployed with or without IMS, which would give the flexibility and time to market to operators who want to launch it ahead of IMS. And we're also offering the cloud or managed service deployment option. Again, we're not the only one by any means to be doing this, but this is seen again as a way to accelerate the deployment of the service and capturing market in a timely fashion. So that concludes the consumer segment that I wanted to address, and I want to move on to the equally important enterprise segment and try to see the specific drivers and opportunities there. So the first point to be made is that enterprises, perhaps unlike consumers, understand the business benefits of unified communications, and they understand that it gives them tools for cost control, personal versus business usage, the ability to bring your own device, which is a very significant trend at the moment, as well as mobilizing all the IT and CRM applications. So therefore, the willingness to pay is significantly better in the enterprise segment, especially when the feature set is one that is really compelling and can show a positive impact on their own bottom line. So this is something that obviously requires a very focused approach on the side of mobile operators. And I should make the comment that traditionally, mobile operators have not been that focused on the enterprise segment, and we would feel and believe that they're missing out on a very, very lucrative opportunity. So let me provide one example from Vodafone, and this is some information that was disclosed by Vodafone in a public investors forum. And this is the Vodafone OneNet service, which is a converged fixed and mobile offer. And when they launched it, they achieved 40% penetration in the small, medium enterprise market in 4 years. This is an astonishing uptake for any service. Mobile ARPU was up by 7%, which is also significant in this kind of cost-conscious segment of the business market. Usage is up. We've seen that the incremental ARPU extended also to fixed line, Customer churn was down by 4%, which is again significant. And all the metrics for the survey are actually extremely positive. So I think that this would be the equivalent of the Rogers survey in terms of a one-number survey, but here with very, very tangible benefits when you target them specifically toward the enterprise or business community. What is the value add? I mean, this is one question that, of course, we would ask the same way we asked in the case of consumer, and I think the answer is quite similar. You know, there is such a thing as an over-the-top business application. Those are typically provided by the likes of Microsoft or other enterprise providers. But if you move to the right-hand side of the slide, there is an opportunity for the mobile operator to provide a value added where unified communication now is charged as a value-added mobile service. And they could leverage the quality of service, the multiple charging option, and perhaps foremost, their branded experience they can deliver to their enterprise customers. Let me talk a little bit about what is the scope of these offers. Obviously, the sort of overarching element here is unified experience across devices. You see that on top. The three silos are relatively familiar, I'm sure, to all of you. You know, we have the calling, the messaging, the collaboration applications. I won't read them out for you. But what's underneath is also very important because you want to have, because you are addressing the enterprise segment, you'd like to have as many open APIs as possible in order to be able to interwork these capabilities into the enterprise application environment. And I'd like to show now perhaps two models that we have identified and are very attractive in terms of how to deliver these capabilities to businesses. And the first one is what we call the app delivery model. So what you see is that from a very simple IPv4 type of offer, we move into an environment where you have essentially a unified communication application running on top of IMS, and it supports multiple devices through a downloadable client. So this would be a branded downloadable client that is specific to this enterprise service. And the benefits here are branded and differentiated user experience, you have consistency, and you also have a very secure and controlled enterprise environment within those devices that is managed by the enterprise. And that fits very well with the bring your own device type trend that they say. The other trend in delivering unified communication is to provide much tighter integration with the mobile network itself. So rather than using downloadable clients to create these environments on the devices, what you do is you try to link the mobile handset as tightly as possible into the overall service. And this strategy is appealing to some operators that prefer not to have to provide downloadable clients, and it enables users to take advantage of these services without having to have a different handset or to have any different experience on the handset. So in this case, call control now for the mobile and the fixed enterprise number is extended and integrated within the mobile operator network. And finally, in terms of a trend that is very, very important into this offer is obviously the fact that a lot of these interfaces have become open in the space, and we certainly believe in that approach. So towards the network, you can see here the SIP and XMPP type interfaces for calling and messaging. And then towards other applications, and especially enterprise applications, you can have RESTful APIs that provide relatively easy integration, and some newer opportunities such as WebRTC that we see will play an increasingly important role in tying these enterprise applications to other business applications which are not necessarily specific communication services. So with those two approaches of delivering the experience, I wanted to show an illustration of how BroadSoft addresses it. So if we look at the client-based delivery model, we have created a product suite that we call UC1. And what this aims to do is to provide a seamless mobility user experience across any device. And this is done through downloadable clients. And you can see at the bottom that we support a full range of devices. And the distinguishing element of this is that all the client devices look and feel the same. So if you access the service on your smartphone or on your tablet or on your PC, the interface is the same. And you have access to the same user information. You have the same address book that is based on the enterprise address book. You have your calling list, you have your history. So essentially you give a very tightly integrated service that is available on all these devices. And in terms of implementation, you can see that we do this by actually providing the application and then interacting through the mobile IMS core with the individual client in order to deliver just that service. One thing that's perhaps worth mentioning here is that if you look at some of the interfaces that we use between our tabs and the devices, we use SIP, obviously, for voice and video. We use XMPP that we feel is optimal for messaging. And we even use some in this case, in-house interfaces such as what's called XSI. But the distinction has to be made here is that this actually is okay, because this is just a call control interface. And when you're providing such a tightly integrated solution, you can afford to put in some optimized protocols. As long as it's not visible to the rest of the world, it can provide some significant advantages in terms of device management and call control that otherwise would be very difficult to implement by other means. And finally, an example for the other model of service delivery. I mentioned that while one is to do it through a suite of similar integrated clients, the other approach is to just integrate it tightly with the mobile network itself. And the illustration here is a product that we have that we call SDF, the Service Control Function. And what this provides is actually it lifts the integration point into the mobile operator network. It delivers a node that is actually connected through SS7 and through the standard camera and IM triggers to provide complete end-to-end, and in fact, it makes the mobile input for business indistinguishable from any other mobile termination that would be tied to their network. So by doing this, they're able to extend all the basic enterprise functions such as extension dialing, opcodes, call recording, we know that list, and do it without actually having to do anything to the handset. So this is delivered through the standard handset, and the call control and service logic are now embedded within the network. So this is I think sort of the view of the enterprise space and the opportunities. And I want to end with just one slide that talks a little bit about the alignment between these enterprise services and something like a consumer service like RCS. You know, we get a lot of questions like this, and it's a very interesting question. So the answer is that RCS is going to become increasingly embedded in handsets. So as such, it will become a native experience that most users are going to use when they interact with friends, their family, basically for typical consumer and entertainment type applications. When these same users want to bring their own device into the enterprise, now they can have the UC client, in our case, the UC1 client, downloaded onto the handset and provide a segregated and separate environment for the business persona, if you will, that the customers would want to have. And this is actually a good thing. I think that in the case of people bringing their own devices to work, they would like the separation where the consumer-oriented features are available natively in the device. But when it comes to the application that supports enterprise, this is now a secure application that is controlled by the enterprise. For example, if this user were to leave the company, then it's very easy to disable that calling and communication application on the device and extend the typical IT type policy, security, and ability to really manage the interaction on those clients in a way that is consistent across the enterprise and not specific to a particular handset. So this is about the if you want, the sort of the coexistence of RCS and Business UC. And I think this brings me also to the time where I think we should be thinking about some questions. So from my perspective, this is pretty much what I wanted to cover. Just a couple of call-outs here from what I've said. So very briefly, LTE definitely has a huge potential to transform the services we can offer, but this can start with 3G and HSPA. We don't have to wait for full deployment. Network effect is very key to adoption, and there are multiple devices, and broadband and Wi-Fi access is very important. Branded mobile operator applications are a real key to differentiation on user experience and providing consistency. Enterprise UC is a major opportunity that MNOs should focus more strongly on. And finally, on the deployment side, as we've just seen, there are few options, and those can be, you can pick and choose depending on the kind of market you're addressing, and sometimes just basically the preferences of different operators. So that's it in terms of the presentation. So I'd be happy to see what questions or discussion we can have.
Great, Michael. Thank you so much for the presentation. We do have about 10 minutes for questions. And what I want to do is I quickly just pop up the results we had from an earlier poll. And Michael, 47% of the people we polled on the call said that higher quality of service for customers was the biggest benefit to the availability of LTE. How does this break down compared to what you've been hearing from customers?
I think that there's definitely complete truth to that, right? I mean, the experience is really what matters. I mean, I'm not sure that I actually see the actual numbers, but if the majority were to say that, I would definitely agree. And it is consistent with what we hear both from market research that we look at, as well as anecdotally when we talk to our customers.
Okay. And I do want to I'm going to pop up a second poll real quick while I'm going to pose another question to you. And so the second poll I'm going to put up is, and this is for the audience, are you considering extending your enterprise service offerings to include any of the following: instant messaging and presence, video calling, web conferencing, none of the above? So we're going to ask folks to cast their votes on this as well. But while we're doing that, and while folks are voting, Michael, if you could maybe talk about what's required for an MVNO to offer roaming. Do they have to negotiate carriers that have roaming agreements? They have to negotiate these agreements with carriers that own the hotspots?
Well, it depends on the business model you want to adopt. So one thing to keep in mind is that there are quite a few players that form an aggregation function when it comes to Wi-Fi hotspot, as well as for just direct mobile interconnection. We know that mobile operators typically have bilateral agreements with those with whom they have a very strong community of interest, typically other operating in the same country. But for others where the community of interest is less strong, they would go to a third-party aggregator. So my just the sort of generic answer would be that if you were to look at launching an MVNO, you would like to start probably with an aggregator that would provide you a very short time to market. And after you do that, once you see your traffic patterns, you can pick and choose the more significant traffic relationships and try and conclude some bilateral agreements that would sort of lower your interconnection costs for those high volume interactions.
Got it. And in the middle of your presentation, you talked about the different types of RCS handsets, and one of the questions from the audience was, what's the difference between an RCS-E handset versus a non-RCS-E handset?
Sure. An RCS-E handset supports the capabilities of the RCS-E service, and I don't mean to sound circular here, but more specifically, it supports IM, which is something that is defined within the RCS-E standards. It supports file share, image share. It also supports live video share. And it does all this while you can be on a voice call. So for example, a typical use case for RCS-E is that you're talking to somebody on the phone and you're in front of a beautiful ruin somewhere on vacation, and you can actually show the other party while you're talking to them a video of what you're actually seeing, and it's sort of see what I see type of scenario. It also, those handsets have to support some lower level functions which are not necessarily end user functions, such as registration with the IMS core, authentication, and so forth. So, there is a whole set of functionality that has to be supported in order to enable the RCS-E service on that particular handset.
Okay, we've got a couple more minutes here. I'm going to close the poll in just 30 seconds that we have up on the screen right now. So any final voters, please chime in there. But I do have a question for you, Michael, from the audience. How do you plan to deploy RCS without an IMS core?
Okay, so the way we do this is by actually having an IMS front end that is actually, if you want, embedded within our RCS application server. So instead of requiring this to be deployed in the operator network, we absorb that function as a front end for our application server. And then what happens is that the operator can deploy an RCS-E service with very, very little real-time service interfaces that would be required, because the handsets would then register directly with our application server, which would provide the IMS authentication functions. And it would also provide any other interaction that is required between IMS and the application server. So the MNO core network will be freed from having to support any of these. And in fact, probably the only function that they will have to be supporting are more related to OSS or BSS type of connection. It's a very fast way to deploy the service, and it also offers the flexibility later on to migrate the IMS function into the network if and when the operator wants to launch their own IMS.
Okay. And just ballpark, what would it cost for a carrier to implement IMS? Just, can you guess that? We've had that question come in a couple times today.
Well, I think that this is, we know that list prices are a very elusive concept in a lot of these telecom. I would say that you're talking, significant investment. I don't think that I can really quote specific numbers, simply because, we're privy to a lot of information, and we know that the prices can vary significantly depending on the scale of the deployment, what kind of bundling is achieved. But I should say that it's a very significant investment. Of course, a very valuable investment, but in terms of upfront cost, it is significant.
Okay. Well, the poll, and I don't think you can see this, but Michael, the final poll question was, are you considering extending your enterprise service offerings to include any of the following? Instant messaging, 18%, video calling, 23%, web conferencing, 32%, and none of the above, 27%. I was just curious, from your point of view, does that surprise you in terms of those responses?
What was the last number? Sorry, I missed that.
Again, 18% said instant messaging, 23% video calling, 32% web conferencing, and 27% none of the above.
I would say that if I were to answer that question, I would definitely put video much higher. Video has tremendous value both in the enterprise where it's clear that the video conferencing is becoming, much simpler and much more prevalent. And we're also seeing a lot of use cases where families, consumers, teenagers use video to enrich their interaction. And it also happens to be the one service that probably benefits the most from LTE and high-speed data. So I would put that one higher. Otherwise, I guess, it's a fair statement that the other ones, are perhaps, not really important.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier in your presentation when you said that video is going to drive higher data consumption. And if you look at the tiered data plan pricing structures that the carriers have in place today, if they can drive people into the higher tiers, it will certainly help drive revenue per enterprise, revenue per household, and video should be a key driver for that. We're at the end of our allocated time. Do you have any closing comments, or if anybody has any further questions, how can they reach you?
Well, my coordinates are, I think, on the first slide. So I don't know if you will make this available, but of course I would welcome anybody to contact me and see if I can follow up with anything. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining and giving us this opportunity to share and exchange information.
Great. Well, the presentation will be made available online. We'll send a link to all the people who attended and all the people who registered. We had a lot of other good questions that come in. BroadSoft and Michael will have those questions and can get back to folks directly. Thank you very much for your time today, Michael, and thank you all the attendees for participating. Have a good day.